So analysis of current state would actually entail understanding the as-is situation, the existing state of affairs, the problem domain, so that you can try and take some strategic decisions in terms of where you want to go. So the vision, the mission, and how you would like to get there. So in that context, you use several techniques. And one of the techniques is SWOT, and the other one is Porter's 5. First one, SWOT analysis, is about identifying the opportunities and threats that are posed by the external environment. And then the strengths and weaknesses are what you have internally within your own organization. So for example, it could be about the pestle. First thing that you would do is with the pestle analysis we talked about: political, economic, sociological, then technological, lifestyle and legal, then environmental. So those factors, all those external factors, you would study and understand what are the kind of opportunities that they're offering you or posing to you as a business, and what are the risks and threats that are also offered by those. So this is the external perspective. If they're offering positive things, that is obviously that's an opportunity that you can latch up. And if they're offering something that that could potentially impact your way of working, your customers, your business, and the process that you have internally, then that could be considered as a threat, so that you can be prepared. It's more or less like a risk that could potentially happen. So that's the external aspect. And then internally, it's about assessing what are the things that you have. So that's what we call as internal resource audit. It's a tool that you would, again, that you could potentially use to understand how good your resources are internally. So you've got, for example, physical resources, you've got buildings, assets, your branding, brand image, brand reputation, brand identity, your employees, your kind of staff, your teams, the people skills and their reputation, and the IPs. And then the other thing is basically the intellectual property that you possess, the IPs and the patents, trademarks, copyrights. So all of these are essentially the internal resources that you have. So they would actually tell you where you've got a lot of strength, where you're really strong in, and then what are the weaknesses when perhaps you might want to actually fill the gaps, you don't have the required skill sets and all that. So essentially, SWOT analysis would help you to understand what are the opportunities and threats posed by the external factors, and how you can leverage your internal strengths and try and fill up the gaps and the weaknesses, so that you can lap up and use the opportunities that are provided by the external factors. So if you look at this, that's pretty much what we're trying to say. So SWOT, as we said, is, so all we do is pretty much kind of identify the strengths and weaknesses internally, and then opportunities and threats, again, from the external factors. And then we'll see how we can match these up, how we can try and leverage the internal resources, how we can make sure that we utilize the opportunities that are offered, and how we can avert the threats and the risks posed from the external factors. And then we will, subsequently we'll come up with the next steps in terms of how we can overcome those. So as a graphical representation, this is what I created so that it's easy for you all. So this is strengths, weaknesses on the y-axis, and the x-axis you've got opportunities and threats. So if you look at it, these are the external factors on the x-axis. On the y-axis, you've got strengths and weaknesses, which is internal. So the way that we plot is basically look at the combination of strengths and opportunities, strengths and threats, weaknesses and opportunities, weaknesses and the threats. So if you look at it this way, this quadrant, the 4 quadrants, if you look at it, would be giving you as to how you can leverage, what kind of strategies you can adopt to make use of the opportunities, to overcome the threats, to use the existing strengths, and then how you can how you can understand and overcome the weaknesses that are currently in your organization. So the first one is actually a combination of the strengths and opportunity. It gives you how to use your strengths to exploit the opportunities. So you can perhaps kind of consider the status quo and the continue as is, because you're already strong in this, have got an opportunity there. For example, if you have some processes, some products which are really good in the market, which you have got, and then these are your strengths because you've established the identity, the branding is already there, you've got the leadership, which means that that's what is being expected in the market. That's where the market strength is, the market share is, and people have got, people are buying that kind of products, or that processes are in vogue. Then that means that you continue that kind of product and product line. And the other quadrant, if you look at this, strengths and threats. So this is about how you can use your strengths to evade the threats. So you don't want to actually take on the threats. You won't actually evade them. You want to kind of avert these threats. For that, how can you use your strengths? So consider turning threats into opportunities. This is where you can try and use the threats as a way that you're trying to look at more on the positive side, and you're trying to turn them into opportunities so that you can use your strengths, because you're already strong in that area, right? So that's the reason why you should not be afraid of actually looking at the threats and averting them. And if you look at this quadrant, the weaknesses, and how you can actually use the opportunity, how to use an opportunity to mitigate a weakness, to reduce, or to kind of make sure that you can work on the weakness, is what is this particular quadrant addresses. It consider developing new capabilities because you're not good at that. So for example, if there is a huge opportunity in the market for, let's say, a vaccine of, with a combination of different drugs, and assuming you are a healthcare company or a life sciences company, where you've been focusing on the drug development and also perhaps some kind of medications, but you're not good with vaccines. So you can perhaps, lap on that opportunity, try and hook onto that opportunity that you have got in the market. There's huge potential for that kind of a vaccine, but you're not good, you're weak in that. So what you need to do is to work on that. Perhaps look for tie-ups, look for small companies who've got their presence in that market in vaccines. So you can either tie up with them, you can do a joint venture, you can actually try and have mergers, acquisitions, you can acquire the company, whatever you can do, you can get the team on board, and then you tend to work on that product, which is actually more in demand, and you can ride on the wave of the opportunities. So for that, as we discussed, you don't have that skill right now. You don't have that. You're not good with that kind of a product. So what you can do is to try and get into partnerships, alliances, mergers and acquisitions. You can buy out that company. You can do all that. You can get some people on board. You don't have the skills, get some people, upskill the people, train them up, and then you can try and get into that kind of a market or a product and work on that. So that's how you leverage the opportunities and work on your own weaknesses. And then the other thing is how you can actually, overcome your weaknesses and try and work with threats from the external factors. So that's where it is about how to restructure, reinvent to address the threat, and reinvent to kind of address the threat in a different way. It's a negative thing, but how can you try and look at it in a different way? So that's where perhaps you need to exit the market, because you're weak in that, and there's not much of scope for that particular product. So why do you want to still stay there? I mean, there's no point actually being in the market if the whole of the airlines industry is significantly suffering because of lower turnout of the travels that almost completely died down. No air travel, the travel industry has died down. And then you've got an arm of, for example, ticketing, e-ticketing for airlines and the luxury yachts, for example. If that's one of the business that you have, one, obviously you don't own that business that has been doing very bad. You don't have the right skills. People who use that kind of a ticketing software, they use a special software for that, and you don't have that. Sabre, which is basically just for ticketing and airline ticketing, for example, they use that. It's hard to find. You've got some people there, they're not doing anything. They just have got that team, not much productivity. They're just burning out the cash there in the last 2 years, for example. And then on the top of that, this threat from the market that it is not, the whole of the airlines industry has suffered, no tourism, no airlines industry, no travel, nothing is happening. Then what's the best opportunity for you to to leverage your weakness, this is the right time for you to actually say, let me divest myself of this particular product line or this market sector. I'm not good with this, and there's no market share, there's no market at all for this offering right now. And I'm just burning the candle on both ends from my own team. A lot of expenditure going on, nothing coming out, no income. Might as well divest. So this is the best time. So that's the strategy that you would adopt if you want to use that threat for your own advantage to overcome your weakness. So those are some of the strategies that you would need to. Again, this is very important because not many people touch upon these strategies and what you need to do. They only talk about, okay, identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's brilliant. But what are you going to do about it? How are you going to use your own strengths, your own weaknesses to either ride on the opportunities or to avert the threats? This is important. This bit is important. This quadrant, this matrix is very, very critical, which is what we often miss out in the usual stuff. And then we've got the Porter's 5 forces model, and very important because it talks about both the external environment in terms of markets forces, the suppliers, the customers, and so on and so forth. And then also how we as a business or an organization, how we can try and react, how you can structure yourself to address those factors or those forces. So if you look at it again, some of the things that would come into your mind is basically attractiveness to the industry and unattractiveness. So basically they're talking about if you've got high barriers to entry, that means that there are significant challenges for newcomers to enter into this. And then you've got weak suppliers, bargaining power. You can't just go to you've got limited bargaining power with suppliers. You don't have much there. And then you can't really go to the buyers as well. So you're tied on both ends, suppliers as well as on the buy side. So you need to look at it more in the context of a supply chain. So this Porter, in fact, Michael Porter's value chain also offers a better example. It's, if you want to understand this 5 forces model, we need to just take a step back, understand the value chain of a particular organization. Every organization has got this value chain of getting the raw materials and working with the suppliers, getting the raw materials, getting the other equipment, everything else from outside, and then trying to produce something, trying to create a product or a service offering or a process. So you do some processing internally. That's where the production or the development work happens, and after that you actually try and deliver the product, and you take the support of HR, marketing, all these kind of IT, all of these to help support your production and your delivery of the product. So that's the value chain concept. And pretty much, again, if you look at it there, you've got both ends, right? We have got the supply end of things, and then you've got the buyer end of things. And what happens in the middle is how you're delivering value to that raw material or to the inventory. And therefore, you need to look at how you can try and address these from different aspects of whether it is attractive from the buyer's point of view, that is, it works for you in terms of interacting with the buyers and getting a better negotiating price for the suppliers. If not, there is no point actually in that particular industry, because there's not much of a profit. Whereas if you look at an industry where it's high barriers to entry, barriers are really high, that means that only limited people, limited players are there in the market. And then if you want, you need to invest significantly to that. For example, mining or railways, these kind of things, infrastructure, very high barriers to enter, because it takes a lot of resources, a lot of planning, a lot of commitment from the players to get into that. That's why you have got very high barriers. You can't just get in to start a company tomorrow to lay the roads or to set up infrastructure for creating railways. So it's so difficult that's why the barriers are high in there. If you have got high barriers, that means that there's not much of competition. And weak suppliers' bargaining power, that means that the suppliers don't have much of bargaining chips on their side. That means that you can actually negotiate. You are in a better position to negotiate with your suppliers in terms of how you would like to. So essentially that means that because of the fact that you have got, it could mean that you've got many suppliers. Sometimes that's an advantage because you've got only 2 or 3 suppliers in your list of vendors, preferred vendors, and then they would obviously, that would mean that you're dependent on them. So whatever they say, you've got to accept their terms, their clauses. But whereas If you've got, multiple set of options there where you can say, I don't need to depend on you, I can go here, I can go here, I can go to a different market, I can get to a different country, I can go to a different geography, I can get this done, I'm not dependent on you. That means that that's when that supplier would actually try and come down from his high horse of high pedestal, and then they actually start listening to your terms. So that means that the supplier's bargaining power is weaker there. And then weak buyer's bargaining power, again the same thing in terms of buyers. The problem again is if you have too many people in the players in the market, too many different companies which produce same product, that becomes a commodity, and then you will not have much say in terms of the buyers. So they decide. If it's a seller's market, which is our market, that means that we can define the terms, we can define the clauses, we have a better say rather than the buyers. In such a market, then who has got the advantage? The sellers. The sellers, because they have got better control, they can actually dictate perhaps the price, sometimes an advantage, but then they can actually say, I want so and so price, and then the buyers have got to understand that, and then they have got to buy the product nevertheless, because that's dictated by the seller, which means that it's going to be an attractive industry again to be in that kind of market. Few substitute products or services, again you've got very limited choice. If you've got limited choice, people are forced to buy your product or your competitor's product. They can't go to 100 others, and that means that again it's not a commodity market. That's why you have to distinguish between branded products and commodities. The moment a thing becomes a commodity, that means that they can go to any XYZ or A to Z people, suppliers, and they can get that, but then when it is significantly niche product or of value product, then that is a very special one, and people would understand, recognize what your offering is, and they would be willing to pay what you ask for as a business. And that's the right market to be in. And obviously that means low competition, as we discussed. So these are the set of the factors or parameters that we need to consider when deciding which industry to enter into, what kind of markets are attractive for us. And the opposite is the unattractive industry. Just whatever we discussed is opposite, because we don't have much profitability in here. We've got low barriers to enter, which means anybody can start a business, which is what is happening with IT enabled, the technology enabled .coms, for example, during the 2000s, and that later part of the 2005s and 2006s. It was a huge .com bubble, wasn't it? So a lot of people had got that option. Everybody started a .com, something XYZ.com, ABC.com, and they started their own business and created the website. So there was a flurry of websites and .com businesses. And then what did that mean? That means that the buyer's bargaining power is not there. Was significantly there during that time, for example, because you've got too many .coms, too many options there. And that means that the supplier's bargaining power also was there. Supplier is not the seller, the supplier to the sellers. So which means that, for example, the domain hosting, for example, people who had these domains, they were offering the domains at such a high price to buy a domain of .com or .co.uk, .co.in, .co.us, .net. All of these had gone for significantly higher price than required, because the suppliers, the domain host companies, the domain service providers have got a great bargaining power. They can say that, no, yeah, if you don't pay, you can go to somebody else. So it's very important that we realize that wherever the suppliers have got a strong bargaining power, negotiation, and then substitute products or services are many, which means that we don't stand a chance. The competition is so intense that you can actually, at the click of a button, you're out, and then they have got the better option than you. So again, that shows that industry is not much attractive for you. So very, very useful. And that's what again, this is something that I put together to explain this in a better way. So you've got suppliers, there are different dimensions or angles to the suppliers, potential entrants, buyers, and substitutes. As if not your company, somebody else. If not your product, some other product. Potential entrants is basically your entry barriers. That means you're trying to either increase or reduce the barriers to the entry. buyers, this is how the buyers would perceive your offering. And then this is supplier side. So, and also the fact that you've got the competitors or industry rivals here. So you can actually try and work out as to which one is either high or low, and ultimately what's the attractiveness of the market.